model. By the way, the XL fucker's huge. I need it.
You need to.
I mean, I like your idea for getting a Star Trek 4 shirt, but but instead of it saying Star Trek 4, it just says the whales.
The one with the whales, like a
No.
Friends episode.
Just the whales. That's it. Just the whales.
I mean, it would be fun to have just a humpback whale shirt,
Mhm.
just like a gray humpback whale shirt.
Mhm.
But I'll take this one.
I do like that one. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's got the Cerritos. It's got Kimalu and Matt. So
That's fantastic.
right, it's writing perfection right there. But you know what else is writing perfection? The new season of Star Trek Discovery.
I wouldn't get that far.
I know.
Hey.
But anyways, for those who are tuning in now, this is Red Shirt Rejects. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Nelson.
And I'm your other host, Trevor Law.
I'm your producer, Commander Ship.
The
Just producing terrible sounds tonight.
Just awful, like the worst
Yeah.
sound.
Worst sounds of
please do not move, Kenny.
I'll probably muted the majority of the night, just to be completely honest. It's just,
That's fair.
I understand what the game is.
That's fair.
Well, so yeah, tonight we're talking about the new season of Star Trek Discovery. The first 3 episodes are out, so definitely spoilers for that. Once that
we will
starts
spoil the crap out of the first 3 episodes of
coming on.
Discovery.
So if you are someone who doesn't care about spoilers, feel free to listen in. If you really don't care about spoilers, but you also are just kind of like curious about whether or not season 4 Discovery is worth it, I think this will be a good discussion because we'll definitely be talking about it in that context. But first, the only real news update that we have going on in Star Trek world is that so there's this big kerfuffle about Discovery being available internationally. Essentially, PBS, what am I talking about? Paramount pulled Discovery off of Netflix internationally and was like, oh, we're going to throw it on Paramount Plus, but surprise, it's not available anywhere outside the US and Canada. So people got real upset about it. And apparently they got a lot of pressure, not only from fans, but also the cast and crew of Discovery, because they built this show for people to watch and they want people to watch it. So,
and if your show is not appealing to an international audience, it's probably going to fail.
Yes.
In this day and age.
In this day and age, it will. So they pushed, and they got Paramount to rush release Paramount Plus, and I think about 8 countries that they weren't going to release until next year, and then for the countries in which for another batch of countries that Paramount Plus is not going to be available for the foreseeable future, they are releasing episodes on Pluto TV, which is a free streaming service that's ad supported that you can watch in a lot of other countries. It's also owned by CBS, so it is now available to some extent to be streamed on one of those services, or you can purchase it through Amazon or iTunes, which they were not available at that time too as well. So so there people can watch it now. So yay! Still feels like just the most self-inflicted of self-inflicted wounds, though.
Absolutely, and it definitely I mean, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, but it had to have been the left hand not knowing what the right hand was doing with how badly botched it was. But I'm glad they're trying to fix it. Hopefully, this won't alienate too many people from Paramount. And it's kind of frustrating because season 4 of Discovery is good, or at least so far.
Yeah.
Season 2 hurt me too bad to give it a pass.
Well, you also just really hate killer AI robots and time travel, and this one had both.
Not only did it have both, but it almost was a perfect let's just do Terminator, but in space. Let's Let's just do Terminator in space. Like, because you got a parent going back in time to turn their child into a savior. You've got like, God, season 2 is just, it's bad and it's lazy and you should feel bad. Like, everyone that wrote that, they should all feel bad. But season 3 and 4 are great.
Yeah, so people can watch it. Yay! So I guess we'll just dive straight into season 4. So the first 3 episodes are out. I have been able to catch up on all 3. I'm assuming all of us have as well.
I've watched the first 3 episodes.
Cool. So I guess the first thing is let's talk about sort of the structure a little bit as far as how it's set up compared to previous seasons. What have you felt about that?
So it feels like it's maintaining like the ABC plot line, like storylines of a lot of like the 90s shows where you had, but they're doing it in a very serialized format, like taking it even further than DS9 did, and honestly even further than a show like Babylon 5 did. Because literally Babylon 5 would have one-off episodes that had nothing to do with the overarching storyline, whereas Discovery doesn't do that. Every episode, at least for the last 2 seasons, has been like they're all part of the main storyline.
Yeah, they didn't really, in the first 2 seasons in particular, they really didn't have many more plots other than what revolved around Burnham and her perspective.
And I think that's a symptom of just like storytelling of the last 2 decades.
Yeah, I don't, there's not a term for it, but it's essentially like if you watch a prestige drama, you have the lead character, you have your Tony Soprano, you have your
Walter White,
your Walter Whites, your why am I drawing a blank on John Hamm's character in Mad Men? Why am I doing that?
I can't think of it.
Oh my God,
Donald Draper,
yeah. And you have them, and yeah, there are some great secondary characters and some great secondary character plots that happen around them, but most of the 90% of the show is within the context of what happens to them, and nothing really happens outside of what they interact with, which is very counter to what Star Trek is, which is an ensemble show.
And I do feel like that was part of the tension of where they were trying to figure out how to thread that needle. Because, like, obviously in season 1, it was like, it's the Burnham show. Everything revolves around Burnham. She's the main character. And that is a terrible idea for Star Trek. I don't care who the character is. Yeah,
it can support a movie. For sure. And they definitely were approaching the first season, and they kept selling it as a movie. Like they kept talking about it in terms of this has more in common with the movies than with the previous shows. And I agree with that, but I don't think it worked. There wasn't enough to hang on to Burnham as a character, I think.
Star Trek 09 stretched out into, how many episodes was season 1?
Oh, it was a lot. It was a lot more than the other seasons. Let me check.
Yeah, I feel like it's 18 episodes.
It's not 18. It's somewhere in between that and 10.
But regardless, Star Trek 09 stretched out into like 10 episodes even. Would be terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, man. And so, but they've, like, it's still very much Burnham is the main character. She's the central character. More often than not, the A plot like revolves around her. Sometimes she's the B plot, but almost always she's the A plot.
There were 15 episodes in season 1.
Yeah, that's anyway. Moving right along from that, but now like. Book is a very important character. Stamets is a very important character. Saru's a very important character. Tilly's a very important character. Kubler's a very important character who, like, every episode he grows on me more and more. The Doctor.
He's one of the only characters that I like immediately had a connection to in this show. Like I've always liked him, even from season one, and when he was killed off, it was very upsetting to me. I wrote about it in our review of it back in the day when that happened. I talked about it on some ancient deleted episodes of this podcast. I really hated that decision. I'm glad
And
they were both in season two.
You were right to hate it.
Yeah, it was a bad call. It was a bad call. He was like one of the only emotional anchors of the show, and they've seen fit to make that continue to be a through point. Like he's a good character. He's a good actor. Yeah, he's a good. He's just a good character to have.
Well, and I think
past.
so, and in particular, because if there was a secondary like the secondary characters of the show, it could be debated. It's between Saru or Stamets, who are like, if Burnham is the top tier, it's one of those two. But for Stamets in particular and Burnham, both of them were such very cold, logical figures.
And they were also antagonists to her. They were foils. Well, technically they were foils. They weren't antagonists. But they were designed to generate tension between her and the plot.
And Saru, he's definitely not a cold individual, but he is very... Calculating is not the right word, but very rational. And so then you've got, Kubler,
he's rational, but he's also by the book is the thing. And I think that's one of the things when we talk about later on with character stuff in season 4, I think that's an interesting thing that they've noted.
Saru's so good. He's so good this season. Every scene he's in, you're just like, regardless. But Kubler, he's a very important character to the show because he injects empathy into every situation he is in. And he forces, and in particular, he's a great contrast to Stamets. Like, I can definitely, I see what Stamets sees in Kubler. I don't really see what Kubler sees in Stamets, if I'm being honest. But they make a very good contrast.
You need to make one correction so I don't continue to say the wrong name. Culber.
Culber?
You're saying Kubler?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not.
I think it's because I was watching Community not too long ago, and there's a fake character named Kugler. And I think I was... But I'm terrible with names, so I make no pretense. But anyway, and I think that also goes into Book, who whole thing is empathy. Like that is like if you had to boil down the character to one word, it would be empathetic. Actually, it would be Druid, but if you had to pick another word, it would be empathetic.
Yes, he is technically an empath.
Yes.
So he's technically like what Deanna Troi kind of is, but like to a whole other level and with the ability to project empathy and communicate on an emotional level with creatures.
He also has another thing in common with Deanna Troi, in that his outfit's changing constantly. However, it actually makes sense for him.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess going back to structure, the main thing is that in the past we dealt with sort of like prestige drama structure. You had a very tight, overwhelming A plot, everything sort of revolving around Burnham and her experiences, and everything else is sort of taking second strip. It gets sort of put over to the side. Like we're not getting a lot of emotional character development for everybody else. And if we are, we're getting it in really small bites that are meant to help project the story and to move fast, got to go fast, break things. But now, since I feel like it started in season 3, but we're really getting to see it in season 4 more, it has become more of that ensemble show. Not everything is revolving around Burnham and her experiences. It started in season 3 with the second episode where Burnham isn't even there, and it's just the crew of the Discovery trying to fix the ship before it gets swollen up by these like crystals.
Incidentally, that was the best way they could have opened up season 3. Just Like, what is Discovery like without Burnham? And loved it.
And I feel like also making her captain sort of fixes part of the inherent tension that existed in the show. Whereas, like the lead character in every series has always been the captain, and it's been a really weird dynamic to have the lead character not be the captain. I think if they had continued with the anthology series plan that they had, that Brian Fuller had come up with when the show was originally devised and written, then that dynamic could have worked, because we would have had a different crew and a different ship in season 2, and then different crew and ship in season 3. And so it wouldn't have really mattered who was number 1 on the call sheet, because that would have changed each season. But keeping that dynamic of her being this outsider to the crew in an ensemble in what's naturally like lends itself to be an ensemble show, is just like really weird. And so now having her be the lead of the ship itself, and in addition to the actual story and cast and everything, it resolves an unnecessary conflict in the way that the writing was happening, I feel.
And it also allows for her to still maintain that somewhat outsider status she has, because when you're the captain, it is a very lonely job. And she's constantly, and by the way, I love how they're doing this. She is constantly the squeaky wheel when it comes to the overall organization of Starfleet.
And I want to go into that specifically more in depth here in a little bit when we get to sort of the world building. But yes.
And so that allows her to be the constant outsider, because like the Admiral likes her, the President tolerates her. And that creates a very interesting tension between all of them. But importantly, and I will admit, this is very hard to do from a writing standpoint, no one is wrong and no one is a jerk. Like, no one is malevolent in their actions or their motivations. They are people, they are rational people with disagreements that are struggling to constantly find common ground. And Burnham has a unique and frankly bizarre perspective, but it makes her a crucial person in all of these situations she keeps finding herself in, or in the case of the Burn, injecting herself into.
Yeah. So I think with the Burn, that brings us to sort of the next topic to look at season 4 through, which is the setting. The setting, I guess, for those who haven't been following, season 3 and 4 take place in the 32nd century, so about 900 years in the future from where the show initially started off in the 23rd century. It is a different place. The Federation is now for people who play Stellaris, the Federation is essentially a fallen empire in this setting, and they're trying to come back. Like they've been reduced down to a couple of dozen worlds and are slowly clawing their way back to trust them again.
I think they had like 10 worlds when Burnham showed up, and now they're back up to 60.
Yeah.
Which, that sounds like a lot, but the Federation in Picard's time was made up of hundreds, possibly thousands of worlds.
Yeah, definitely thousands by the time that the Burn happened. You're led to believe it encompassed the majority of the Alpha and Beta Quadrant.
And it is both implied and outright stated that the Federation had become too big, and that it was like some worlds were under a constant strain trying to support this endlessly expanding Federation. Mm-hmm. And some people greatly resented the Federation for it. And it's one of those things to where once you join the Federation, it's very hard to leave it. It's not, because you'll be very isolated if you do. So if you have a huge disagreement with the Federation, it only only makes things worse, and it creates worse and worse tension. So like so many other times in human history, when you've had a collection of city states or small nations or even large nations try to come together. And it's I'm frustrated that they didn't just start the show or like do season like halfway through season 1 where they ended up like this or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you found yourself written into a corner and you don't know how to fix it or you can't fix it, this is a good idea of how to do a soft reboot of your show.
Agreed. And that was like the most frustrating experience of watching, because like I don't want to be the person who's being pedantic about canon, but when you are writing a story that exists in a pre-existing universe, you have to worry about canon to some extent. And yeah, that means you get to ignore things like the animated series, or you get to ignore like, you know, how transporters work in this episode is contradictory to how they work in this other episode. Like, you can ignore little tiny things like that, but aesthetics is really important. Also, just the way characters behave and sort of the world in which they inhabit are important things to contextualize for characters. And setting it in the 23rd century, like, you know, 15 years or so, 10 or 15 years or so before the original series, I feel like really boxed them in for a lot of things, particularly because like it just didn't look like it neither looked like Enterprise, which came before it, nor did it look like, you know, the original series, which came after it. And it's supposed to be set in sort of this transitionary period between the two. And instead of like sort of, you know, going for that from a set perspective, it felt like every decision that they made, aesthetically speaking, for the show was just to almost completely disregard decisions that have been made before and give everything like a soft visual reboot to a hard visual reboot, depending on the thing. So like
this isn't your dad's Star Trek.
Yeah, like the phaser redesign, that was pretty cool. I liked how like the muzzles had different how different settings were like a different muzzle. Like, that was cool. They were like things, but it still looked essentially like a phaser from The Cage. Like, it was still very similar to that, but like the uniforms were different. The Klingons, of course, were way different. It took a lot of liberties with the way a lot of things worked and operated, and it was frustrating. In addition to all of the stuff we talked about with the tension, with how it wasn't, the character we were following wasn't even like an officer in Starfleet by the point we really start getting into the story. It caused a lot of unnecessary complication for existing longtime fans that just made it really hard to deal with, because it just didn't feel like Star Trek at a core level. It felt like Mass Effect with a veneer of Star Trek, and that was very frustrating to watch. And now I feel like they've fixed that.
And part of me is like, because Mass Effect has a very iconic look to it, and so, but also like when I think about the future, I do think Mass Effect does the best job of capturing like a realistic, in terms of like the way the technology looks. So I am sympathetic to that. But yeah, you're right. It was like, let's just do Mass Effect, but you know, we'll reskin it. And that was really like Picard season 1 also, that was the issue with it.
Well, like for me, so I don't have a problem with Picard season 1 with that, mainly because it's set after a period that we no longer saw. So we're set like a decade after Nemesis. So it makes sense that things would aesthetically change. And during that same time period, we get Mass Effect in the real world. So it leads me to believe, like, you know, people's aesthetics can change. So that didn't bother me as much as it did with being set in this important transitionary period where we have so much like fiction that's been set that we've seen already. It irked me. But by moving to this time period that they're in now,
that's really not an issue.
Them up. Yeah, it frees them up to do whatever they want. Ships have detachable nacelles now. Like, that's absolutely absurd on every level. I think it's ridiculous. I don't think, from a world building perspective, that it makes any sense at all. But it's 1,000 years in the future. They can do whatever they want.
And that does lead me to. So, I don't know how nitpicky this is.
It's always a good way to start.
So you've got several scenes, and it happened a lot in season 3, where you've got characters who are from hundreds or even thousands of light years away, like being essentially like hologrammed, where for all intents and purposes they're there, but they're just a hologram of themselves. And
Yeah.
and like you had a guy from Trill who was on Discovery. You had Stamets and Book on Navarre. The president was I don't know where the president of Navarre was, but she was definitely not physically at that location. And so how are they able to instantly communicate? Because it's instant. There's no time delay.
Well, they've always been able to instantly communicate in Star Trek
So
through subspace.
So even subspace had a delay. And there were several times
It depends on the fiction. It depends on the series.
Well, in TNG and DS9, there were delays constantly.
There were delays constantly because of their subspace relays are like the backbone of like the subspace transmission. So subspace relays can be damaged, they can be hacked, they can be jammed, and that can cause delays. But as long as the subspace relays are intact and functioning properly, they are an instant form of communication.
No, because
well, how else is Cisco able to communicate with an admiral on Earth through the view screen?
Well, so I don't.
The
reason why I say that though is because there were several times where Picard was having to be like, "This is going to come down on you, Picard," and it was like a 3-hour delay in the message or whatever.
So those are because the distance from the subspace relay that's how that's explained in the fiction. Is that there's a time delay, like depending on how far away you are from the subspace relay, essentially.
And it's established that the subspace relays have all been repaired. Because that's a lot of subspace relays. I mean, granted, repairing the one to Trill and the one to Navarre would be pretty high priorities.
And more than likely, you still need to communicate, even if you're not a part of the same, you're still part of the same interstellar community, whether or not you're part of the same government. So more than likely, Navarre and Trill would maintain their own subspace relay.
That's true. It was very odd to me, is all. And that bit of technology, I feel like they're going to run into some problems with it, like specifically from a writing standpoint. Because I'm going to ask the question, why do they have to be physically anywhere?
Well, that's the thing with Star Trek, though. There are, and I would characterize this as a nitpick, but with Star Trek, they've always played fast and loose with communication rules, and they will always change that depending on how convenient or inconvenient or how much it affects the writing. Like, if for the writing perspective, if they need it to be dramatic, they're going to create an issue in which communication is going to be hard. Or if they just need it to be convenient so that they can move the plot along, it's going to be convenient. Things like it's the same thing with sort of like distances at warp. Like they never really the warp is the speed of plot. Like they're going to get to a place as fast or as slow as they need to for the purposes of it. Even though there are technically hard times, they don't really follow them.
Okay, I guess I can go along with that. It's just very.
It's just Star Trek. It's tricky because Star Trek has a veneer of hard sci-fi when really it's not.
Yeah,
they have like their own internal rules that they sometimes try to follow, but they might change them depending on the fact that some showrunner thinks that a certain decimal value sounds more or less realistic depending on their thoughts. Like that's why we have the ridiculous warp scale at like, the Voyager travels at warp 9.997 versus like the Enterprise D travels at warp 9.93 or something like that. And that's just because Rick Berman really thought that the fact that there was the decimals there made it sound more scientific, and everybody else thought it was ridiculous and dumb.
It's fair.
And they were right, because
Yeah.
No one cared.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I constantly have those kinds of thoughts when I watch Discovery. But the only time in Discovery when it's specifically in seasons 3 and 4 where I was like, what the hell is going on, was the final fight scene in season 3.
Yeah.
Everything else has been,
and we're talking about the fact that there is apparently a massive cityscape in the interior of the Discovery that is
yes,
like the size of like a small moon
yes,
or whatever.
Absolutely.
It looks like Tron on the inside of that.
Just the most ridiculous thing. But aside from that, everything else is nitpicky. And is like I don't know what their visual effects were thing. I don't know, or the people that ordered their visual effects people to make that decision.
I am very curious about that entire thing. I don't know how that worked because
the fight on the turbo lift itself was fine. It was,
that was good. It was just the fact that it looked like honestly, and it's probably because I had just watched Captain Marvel prior to that, but it reminded me a lot of the capital city in Captain Marvel, because there's a tram scene in there, and it looked the same, and it looked like a city.
It's not just you. I happened to be watching that episode with my mom, and she was like, is this fight going on in a city? She was not paying attention. She just looked up and saw it and was like, is this going on in a city?
Yeah, that part didn't make sense. But that sort of goes to me with... So I kind of want to skip to the world building now, because I think this leads into it pretty well. The world building, I still think, needs some work. This is probably one of the areas where I think that they have done much better in season 3 and 4, because I feel like in season 1 and 2 they were relying so much on existing canon. Ironically, they were relying on fans' understanding of existing canon to sort of let them shorthand things and just run with it. They didn't feel like they actually needed to establish Federation ideals to really contrast in the Klingon War of why the Federation deserved to survive, which was really frustrating for me, because I feel like, although I understand what the Federation is, I don't feel like shorthanding the central moral dilemma of the season was good writing.
It also didn't help that Lorca was one of your big moral compass points in establishing the ideals of the Federation, you freaking lunatics.
Exactly. So it was tricky. Season 3 and 4, I feel like have done a really good job of sort of establishing sort of the state of the Federation, what they're in, and what the Federation believes in, and what makes the Federation different and unique. Mm-hmm. And then it allows us to establish sort of what what Starfleet is, therefore, and how they're interacting with people, and why the mission of Starfleet and the Discovery itself is vital and essential, and why it is important that they succeed, and what failure for them means. So in establishing the world, it's helping to establish the stakes. That being said, I still feel like there's weirdness going on with sort of broadly speaking, this sort of maybe nitpicky, but I don't think it is, because I think that when I look at a lot of fans talk, it's stuff like this that people bring up. Things like the burn. So yes, I understand the premise of the burn. This kid who's on somehow on this dilithium planet experienced horrible emotional thing, and then his emotional anguish ends up causing the burn. But like, I still don't feel like that was explained very well. I don't feel like the burn itself like made much sense. Like how could all that dilithium blow up, and how could only the dilithium in active ships like blow up? And if only the dilithium in active ships blew up, how much dilithium actually blew up, and how were the Orion Syndicate able to get access to the remaining dilithium, and no one else was able to get access to that? Like it's a lot of mechanical stuff like that that I feel like the show doesn't do a really good job of explaining, because it feels like they're coming up with some of these conflicts on the fly as they're writing the episodes, which is fine, but I feel like I should have some of this established a bit more before the season starts.
Yes, you are absolutely right, and I was fine with it because it led to some really good Saru moments.
Yeah.
So I did not look too hard at it. I didn't think too much about it. I Michael Bayed it, where I just don't think about it. But you are right. Like the whole like, what is Saru's race again? Kelpian.
Kelpian, yeah.
A Kelpian child who was like emotionally stunted and essentially like driven somewhat crazy because he was alone.
And those have to be said. I thought that was the strongest part of the finale episodes. Like I was much more invested in that story than I was the Orion Syndicate story.
Which is saying something, because the Orion Syndicate story was actually pretty good, and it had one of the most interesting twists I have ever seen from a villain, where she was like, yeah, I think our conflict is stupid and pointless. I think we are arguing largely over semantics, and here is a way we should just merge and just not deal with these issues. And the Admiral's like, you make some really good points. I cannot deny this. What about all the war crimes you committed?
But the war crimes.
But the war crimes. Like, are you
And
just going
slavery.
are you just going to walk away from all the war crimes and the crimes against humanity and other races?
Yeah,
all
right.
the races, including your own?
The crimes against sapient species or whatever.
Yes.
Honestly,
and non-sapient species.
yeah. Oh God, yeah, you're right. With
Yeah.
what they were doing with Quajon.
Like just so and anyway, it was season 3 finale was very good. All the like probably the weakest one was Stamets and what is his name? I'm completely
Hugh Culber.
Wait, it's Q Culber?
Hugh.
Hugh
Like who hip?
Hugh Culber.
Olberg.
Culber. Like
Culber.
Culber.
Yes.
Culber.
Calvadosis.
Culber's storyline, where he was like just trying to get off the planet, was like the least interesting
Yeah.
to me of all of that, and it was not bad. But you like they were all the oxygen in the room was sucked out, because it was the first time we really got to deal with Saru confronting the mass trauma that his race has had to endure.
Yeah.
And seeing that, they shook it off, like they overcame it, like they what does that
We get to grow old now?
what does that even mean? Like what even are we now that we're not shackled by that?
Yeah.
So very good, very strong. I completely derailed this, and I'm sorry, because I'm gushing about season 3.
No, this was a good thought. But yeah, so anyways, that's where my concern is with season 4, is that because with the Federation, like they have time to, but I feel like I'm not given enough of a reason for why the Federation essentially fell apart. Like, so I understand, like, from a size perspective and from the fact that the burn happened, that it just was really hard to govern the Federation. Um, but I would like more detail into sort of what the Federation turned into that would cause people to not want to rejoin the Federation.
Because it's very obvious that some people downright hate the Federation.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. Like, there are people who do not like the Federation, and we were told in season 3 that, like, the Federation was like a boogeyman for a lot of people. Like, Andorian children were told stories about the Federation to, like, keep them up at night.
Which the big four of the, like, core of the Federation are Earth, the Vulcans, the Andorians, and the Tellarites. And we haven't even seen where the Tellarites are, but, like, all 3 of those are not in the Federation and hate it.
Yeah.
That's not...
And they've not given me a good reason as to why they fell away, beyond just the logistics behind maintaining the Federation post-burn. So I would like to know more of that. I think part of that might play into the central plot of the season, the arc of the season, so to speak. In particular, and this sort of goes into something that we were talking about earlier.
We will push this off for spoilers when we get into spoilers.
Okay.
But I know what you're saying, and I absolutely want to come back to it because there was something else that I saw that I want to talk about.
All right, so let's just do. Let's see. I guess main verdict I think to talk about before we talk about spoilers is this Trek. Would you define this as Star Trek, and did you think of the previous seasons as Star Trek?
So first, I think it's important that you need to define what makes Star Trek Star Trek. And this is my definition of Star Trek. First off, it is discounting, like, the generic, like, sci-fi on a spaceship or in space doing things, having adventures. Wagon train to the stars as it is. The first word I would use to describe Star Trek is optimistic. That doesn't necessarily mean everything is going well, but it is a perpetually optimistic view of the future. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, of humanity's interacting with things in the future, whether it be aliens, technology, each other. And that is my first criteria of if something is Star Trek. And if it doesn't meet this first criteria, and then after that, it's all, I feel, very subjective. Like, it's just all like, what does this make me feel? And I do think it all comes down from that one word of optimism. Of, like, human beings became better than what we are now. And I think that is a very core thing. And I would argue that season 1 of Star Trek failed miserably.
Yeah.
In that. Season 2 was hit or miss. And then season 3 and 4, they have succeeded in that. And it absolutely does feel like Star Trek. Because I would argue, like, episode 1 of season 2, like, really shocked me because it was so different from what season 1 had been, and it was good, which is not something I had come to expect from Discovery. But it was like...
because even though the overall, like, season plot, I feel like, wasn't very good, I feel like on an individual, like, episode to episode beat, it was good. I feel like season 2, like, there was a lot of really well acted moments. There was a lot of really good character arcs. It was pretty. Overall, I enjoy season 2, but yeah, I agree. I did not really feel like it. Still didn't quite feel like Star Trek. Adding Pike and Spock helped because not because I feel like for the nostalgia's sake made it Star Trek. I feel like those characters at their core sort of represent what Star Trek is about. And,
they established like why Starfleet is the good guys.
Yeah, which was like completely missing from season 1. Like they just sort of, like I was saying earlier, they relied on your fans' understanding of it, but didn't bother to explain it to anybody else.
I do want to make one, not objection, but I would push back against Star Trek being the good guy. Or sorry, against the Federation being the good guys.
Yeah.
More about the ideals of what the Federation should be. So that's why I think Lorca, in season 1 could have been a twist of that, and season 2 is about we need to correct, like that's not what we're about. Ergo, when wow, goodness, I mixed Pike and Spike.
You're watching Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that's when they could come back in season 2 and reestablish, like, no, this is what we're really about, because this crew has been shell shocked by Lorca and everything that happened, and obviously they didn't execute that well. But I think that's what that could have been, and it's obviously just that's not what they were thinking about. That is every piece of evidence we have in season 1 tells me that's not what they were thinking about. But,
Agree. I agree that I do feel like that was their intention with bringing in Pike in season 2, but I don't think that I do agree that I don't think that they earned that. I feel like they could have really done that interesting thing of, because there's a trope that happens in Star Trek a lot where you have a crazy captain. You have a captain who goes off the reservation and does things that are anti-Starfleet or anti-Federation values, and our crew encounters them and sees the effects of what they've done, and it's supposed to teach a moral lesson. We've never seen that really from the inside. Like, we've never had that crazy captain actually be the captain of the hero ship. So that could have been an interesting thing for them to do, to like give us that insight on the inside, but they didn't do that. Instead, like, they didn't really challenge his ethos until we find out that he's secret space Hitler, and then it just goes apart, and it was a mess, just a mess.
It also didn't help that like him and Giorgio's like opinion of the Klingons, where it's just, oh no, what you need to do is break their will, and that will end this. And like, incidentally,
yeah, you're right. They also weren't wrong, actually.
Yeah, and so like
they weren't actually wrong the whole time, like in specific.
And like Burnham, though, the whole thing that kicks off that season was Burnham saying, "No, you need to blow them up."
Just punch them as hard as you can, right in the nose.
So you have Burnham, Lorca, our main character who's supposed to be the hero, Lorca, who is secret space Hitler, and Giorgio and Giorgio, Empress Giorgio, who's like not even secret space Hitler. She is space Hitler, but successful. Unlike Lorca, loser. So you have all three of these characters saying the same thing about the Klingons, where it's just, no, you need to kill so many of them that it will break their will to fight. And no one really pushing back on that until like the very end of the show.
Right. Like, no. We can just make them think that we're going to kill all of them, and then that'll be enough. Yeah, it was a bit much. But
while Trevor collects himself, I will make one other thing. The reason I brought up ideals versus just them being good is that I think, to your point about unresolved things from the burn and the logistics of Star Trek, logistics of the Federation, is based on the things you've heard from the Admirals so far about how much they had to go isolationists and pull and retract within themselves, and what we saw happen on Earth, and we know other factions do not like them. Like, I think that would be a great thread for them to pull on. And
I just want to jump right into that, but I'm holding myself back. I have so many things to say about that.
So, honestly, though, is there anything non-spoilery we want to say? Like, is there anything left to say that's non-spoiler?
I would just say I feel like it's Star Trek now, and if for anybody who's maybe read any of the reviews I've written for this, I feel like the central ethos of Trek is back, and I'm not just talking about the perspective of like Federation good, ideals good, IDIC. I'm talking about like, because they've been doing that for a while. It's like a return to character focused ensemble formats with like, even though there's overarching like sort of a plot throughout the season, we're getting like, adventures of the week. It's not like it's become more relaxed and less rigid on the serialized part, and it's giving us a chance to explore more in a world like and see the final frontier, so to speak. So
and this is, I think, the last thing, and this is my personal favorite thing of what I'm seeing in these last two seasons, because it really excites me. So TNG and Voyager and TOS, honestly, DS9 was the best, but they still weren't the greatest at this. Whereas if you saw another person who was in a Starfleet uniform, they're probably evil if they're not on the crew. Or at the very least, stupid.
This is the part I want to get into.
So, but Discovery is doing it better than anyone else of like showing that like, oh wait, there are admirals that aren't evil. There are admirals that aren't psychotic. They're actually like administrators within the Federation who are actually competent and good and have like good motives.
Okay,
and that is something I really like about this. All right,
yeah,
go on, Kyle.
Full spoilers. Okay, so that is like, we have talked about this so much, like off mic over the years, about, because like that is the biggest trope in Star Trek, is that the evil admirals and for one, up until DS9, you never really had a consistent admiral. Like there wasn't really a consistent chain of command that you could tell. There was just like an admiral of the week that would show up and they would do something. And like there wasn't like, and I guess the rules for the flagship of the Federation are different. Like then I guess they don't have like, Picard doesn't have a direct commander, I guess. So cool. But like Cisco didn't really up until Admiral Ross showed up.
Until the Dominion Wars started, really.
Yeah, Nechayev showed up a couple of times in the earlier seasons, but beyond that, like you didn't really have like, he didn't have a main commander either. And then eventually he gets Admiral Ross. Obviously Voyager is out in the Delta Quadrant, so they don't really have anybody up until Admiral Paris starts showing up with the Pathfinder project.
And even then, he's more like, hey, this is the only helpful piece of advice I can give you.
Yeah, and he's not really commanding them so much as he's trying to get them home. And then, of course, we get Admiral Forrest in Enterprise, and he's consistently the Admiral until he gets murdered. In season 4,
I loved Forrest. I loved Forrest so much.
So good. But yeah, and so and then now we're finally getting that with Discovery, because obviously with Discovery you had Admiral Cromwell and then she dies, and then now you've got our new admiral. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. It's something.
I don't. He was one of the guy. He was the guy in The Mummy who's like perpetually good looking, no matter what he's wearing or what, like
a fine wine,
like just a distractingly good looking man.
It's true, but yeah. So that was like what was beautiful about when they introduced him is like we didn't see the Federation; they were like ghosts. We didn't know who the Federation really was at this point. Like how much had they changed, and then we interact with them, and there's like this inherent tension because of that, like understanding in Star Trek of that, like, just because you meet somebody in the Federation doesn't mean that they're good guys. And it took time for us to understand who he was. And like, there was naturally an antagonistic relationship because like some random people claiming to be from the future just showed up with a magic spore drive that nobody's ever heard of that can magically solve all of their problems.
Yeah,
like,
and
all of Starfleet's logistical issues in one ship.
And all they want to do is help, old buddy, old pal of mine.
With the Terran Empress. on board.
Yeah. Oh, and with like the first mutineer in Starfleet history, which that would have been in the records.
Yeah, right. So it's like, excuse me, you can do what? No, this is not like you've not heard of the temporal accords. This. There's so many laws have been broken, and so
All
like,
the laws,
it made-
all the laws.
it made so much sense for them to have that antagonistic relationship, for them to have to like build trust with each other, that like the future Federation actually like still believes in the core ethos of the Federation, and that these people from the past actually did happen to come here for legitimate reasons, and it wasn't that this isn't like an Orion Syndicate plot to like, or Emerald Chain or whatever they go by now. It's not like some Emerald Chain plot to like subvert the Federation. So that was really great. And I feel like they're continuing that in season 4 with the president, because like of course we've not gotten, like we've only seen 2 Federation, 3 presidents in the past. There were 2 in the movies and 1 in the show, and they're all idiots, with the exception of the one in the Voyage Home. Not the Voyage Home. He's an idiot.
Undiscovered Country.
Undiscovered Country. He's the only one. Red Foreman. Yeah. The Red Foreman president. He's the only one that doesn't seem like a complete idiot.
I would argue that the president in Deep Space Nine did not seem like a complete idiot. He did, however, seem like very naive.
Complete idiot. Like you're not going to become the president of the Federation and be that naive. That's just not going to happen. That's not realistic in any way, shape, or form.
Kyle, I need to establish. Think about who we've seen as heads of state.
Okay, so there's a difference. I agree with naive is a better way of putting it. There is a difference between being an idiot and being naive. So, like, I'm just saying. So, and also, if this was Star Trek, someone being an idiot or naive as a president would be a plot point. Like, this is like, anyways.
Okay.
My point is that so they're still using that natural like tension that we typically have for like authority figures, because obviously Burnham is very like anti-authoritarian in most of the shows. Like she's characterized as being a maverick.
Incorrect. So Burnham. So I need to establish this. Burnham has a very funny set of traits for me, where when she's in charge, she is always right.
Yeah.
When someone else is in charge, she is always right, and thus it is okay to break all the rules.
Yeah, exactly.
The rules do not apply to Burnham.
Correct.
Just I needed to say it.
But I feel like what's really nice about this is, so one, it's an interesting area that Star Trek hasn't really explored, which is the political side of how does the Federation actually work? Like we understand Starfleet, that's our main characters, like we have a pretty good understanding of how they work and function. But the Federation itself, like there's the Federation Council, but like how are these people appointed? How do elections work? Like how does a planet become a member of the Federation? And I feel like through the president like trying to stitch the Federation back together, we're going to get more windows into that. But also seeing a president who's not malevolent, it seems, but is also like very realpolitik in Star Trek is fascinating. Like in particular the last episode where like she's got someone who like murdered a Federation officer, and quite frankly I feel like she was a fucking idiot. She was bad at her job. There were a dozen ways that she could have resolved that problem without murdering people. And she did it anyways because she's an idiot. And like, so she deserves to go to prison. And instead of the Federation has every right to prosecute her for doing that. But instead of doing that,
to be perfectly blunt, the Federation had every right to take her into an alley and shoot her in the head. like straight
Not
up.
that far, but like in self-defense.
No,
like,
anyone, like you murder, like here's a resource we are giving away. All you have to do is tell us what it's for. You didn't tell us what it was for. You stole so much of it, and then you murdered one of our officers.
she
so
stole
you
a whole planet's worth.
Yes. So yeah, no, like obviously the Federation has a much higher moral standard than I do, which is why I like it. But yeah, if any country just shot that person the second they caught them, I would be like, yeah, it's fair.
but that's my point. So instead they give her to Navarre to deal with, which obviously they favorably view the Qowat Milat. So, and there was just a really like tasty political dilemma in that episode that I thought was really interesting and intriguing, and I really hope that they continue to draw that line out of the difference between what the Federation stands for and the realities of like how are we going to rebuild this and in a way that doesn't necessarily compromise those ideals, and what ideals are they willing to compromise in order to make that work.
And so now we're in spoiler territory. There is something like I really need to like get off my chest.
Mm-hmm.
So and like I do feel like the president is going to have to make a choice of where she's eventually going to be like, no, I can't. This is, if I have to do something like this to keep to rebuild the Federation, then it's not the Federation anymore. I hope they make her draw that line. I really want to see that line. I don't know what that line will be, but I really want to see it.
Yeah.
2, the president of Navarre did a mind meld on Book and made him like just to see for a visual record of if there was, I think, tachyon radiation that emitted from it.
Something about tachyons.
Yeah. And if the atmosphere had a certain glow when it hit, and that's what they were looking for. But Book asked her to keep going because he wanted to see all that to get some level of closure.
Mm-hmm.
The president was deeply disturbed when she walked away from that. And yeah, and that obviously seeing a planet die, I don't care what kind of person you are, that's going to have an effect on you because you're seeing it in first person and you're feeling all the things he's feeling. So, but I think she saw something. I think she saw something that revealed that she either knows what this new anomaly is or she suspects what it is. And I think that is not a woman who was shook from seeing. Maybe it was. Maybe she was just shook from a deep.
This lady's lived through the burn and the after effects of it. Like, no, she's not.
She's got
easily shook.
Honestly, this is something that would shake somebody who's not easily shook. So I could buy that, but I don't think that's what shook her.
Yeah.
I think she saw something that was a tell that Book, because Book's a space druid. He's a good pilot, but he's not a scientist. He's not going to know.
He's a great pilot.
He is a great pilot. He's a great pilot and a space druid. And he has my undying love for it.
God, so good. So awesome.
He's so cool.
Cool.
It's kind of frustrating how cool they keep making him. Like I kind of need him to, some aspect of him to.
You need him to be
cool.
lame to some extent. Like maybe he's bad. He's a bad dancer or something.
Or maybe
I don't know, but that would still kind of be sweet.
It would be. That would still be endearing. Like
it would be endearing, but I need him to be imperfect in some way.
If Ronan's gun was a character trait, I think we've seen it.
And like, I'm not mad about. It's just like, and it really works because it's great because, like, it's obvious why Burnham is so into him. Which I can see why he would be into Burnham. Like let's be real. Oh, sorry, I got a it was a tangent. I'm sorry. What was I talking about?
Anyways, so the thing I'm really interested in, and this is just like, I don't know why this interests me so much, but like from a world building perspective, okay, so I'm really into history. And in particular, I'm really into like Roman and Byzantine history. And so much of this season, like the setting that we're currently in, feels a lot like sort of like a Rome that has collapsed essentially down to Constantinople or some of the areas around it. And so it's just an interesting idea of like a rebuilding of an empire, or rebuilding, a
It's
restoration.
Byzantium at the 1444 start date.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a really interesting like time period and perspective, and I really want to see a lot more of the outside world. I want to know how, like, I love what they've done with Navarre and how, the Romulans and Vulcans have essentially come together to create a unified culture. Like, I want to see what Klingons look like now. I want to see what Cardassia and Bajor look like. In particular, those, because now the president is like, Cardassian Bajoran hybrid. Like, are they a united people now? Are they just friendly? Like, what does it look like? What does the Gamma Quadrant look like? Like beige, like, I mean, is the wormhole open? Like
what are the wormhole aliens like? What is the Dominion like? Is it still around? Did it eventually collapse? Like, are the changelings running around being like traitors and mercenaries and like people?
Yeah, like there's just so many, or the Borg even. Like you would have thought, like, because the burn wouldn't have impacted the transwarp conduits, so the Borg would be fine. So like, why haven't the Borg just assimilated everything? Like if everything is so disconnected from each other, I don't know. It just, there's a lot of world building questions and like sort of that I'm really curious about, that I really hope that they take the opportunity to explore. In addition to this really interesting like primary threat.
Huge tangent, but there's a great episode of Voyager, and I rarely will ever say that, where where Chakotay finds a group of Borg refugees. This is like a season 2 episode, and it's before they actually encounter the Borg properly, where they're former drones who have since reclaimed their individuality, but willingly built a collective that they could partially interact with.
Mm-hmm.
So like they could hear each other, but they could push it out when they wanted to. So it was like if the collective is Budweiser, they would be Bud Light. And I honestly would love to see what a civilization, if that is the post Janeway Borg.
Yeah.
Where they've like partially assimilated, and I would really like to see that. And honestly, I would be here if season 5 of Discovery was just about that. I would be here for it.
Yeah, the Borg galvanized after he was killed in Picard and made that a reality.
What'd you say?
You know how they killed Hugh, in Picard.
So, like, again, the things that happened in Picard had no emotional resonance with me because
that one did, because it upset me.
Well, no, because
that one did upset me.
It didn't upset me because at that point it was just like it was an entire season of girlfriend's head in a fridge, and I was so desensitized to it that I was like, whatever, sure. Maybe like maybe they can like machete someone in front of us.
Sure. I hadn't thought about that season like that, so didn't mean to derail, but
yeah.
But I am curious to see what they end up doing with the Borg, or if that's just going to end up being a non sequitur, but to
So
Kyle's point, I think there's some interesting threads that could be picked up from
there are some
Connor
interesting.
and carried on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Fast forwarding, essentially, 1,000 years in the future, like where is everybody at? What's the status quo? Like we're still
How many
perspective.
how many of these cultures are the cultures we're familiar with anymore? Because 900 years is a long freaking time, and cultures change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I mean, how much have the Vulcans' views on emotion changed now that they've essentially formed a culture with the Romulans? Like,
Because it's already different. Like I can already like they don't suppress them. Like they don't. Like the way she was reacting to Book. Like, and honestly, when Vulcans would react to other people's emotions, their response was no, embrace logic, suppress it.
yeah,
Like that was part of why Burnham was so in season 1 of Discovery. Yeah, and these Vulcans are not the Vulcans of Spock's generation. Like they're not, and I'm here for it.
it's interesting. So yeah, I'm wanting more stories like that. I'm enjoying it. I really like season 4 so far. I have gripes like with I disliked the Co-op Malat story somewhat in this episode. I think it was the weakest part.
It was the only good part about that was Tilly being in a combat situation. That was it. And like
there were a lot of things I liked. I really enjoyed like the interaction between the characters. I really enjoyed the world ship, which was absolutely a throwback to the animated series.
that was pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. And like literally, I was like, can I make like a sci-fi D&D thing around this concept?
Well, so there is an animated series episode. It's in season 1. I looked it up earlier, and I do not remember the name of it. But essentially, they find this same type of ship, but different things happen on it. And but it's a similar species, like an insectoid, like species or whatever, that live in pods. Like it was very, very much inspired by that episode. But,
And I always appreciate when Star Trek uses weird aliens.
absolutely.
Like
and the animated series has the weirdest aliens.
I mean, because they're animated, they could afford to have weird aliens.
Yeah.
Not like the Vulcans are so radically different from humans.
Right. I still want. There's a character from the animated series that I've not seen his race show up later. I don't even think his race has shown up in Lower Decks, but they're essentially big, tall, and furry, and they have like a third arm sticking out of their chest. And he was like the navigator in the animated series. I really want another one of those to show up. Anyways, that's neither here nor there.
So yeah, I'm really excited now. Like I actually felt things. Whereas in like season 1 and parts of season 2 of Discovery, I was just like, whatever. Like sure, why not? Here I'm like, yeah, I'm here for this.
Yeah.
But I think organizations like the Kuat Malat are stupid. So
I still really like them. That's my favorite thing to have come out of Picard. I really like them.
you use swords. Well, like literally the thing I yelled in that fight scene where the Starfleet officer is killed. Where's your phaser? You know these things are getting stolen.
He reached for his phaser.
No, we didn't.
Yeah, he did. He grabbed the phaser and then she stabbed him. She knocked it out of his hand and then she stabbed him to death. That's what he grabbed off the wall as a phaser.
Oh, why? No, why didn't he have one on him though?
They didn't think they were going to get attacked. It was just like this is like a mail run.
He had literally mentioned it had been stolen. Like dilithium shipments were being stolen.
Oh, he did? Okay, well, never mind. That's dumb.
Yeah. And I hope that
Also, those were
Discovery,
apparently mercenaries she hired.
who like
Why
honored the
were they
Kuat
using
Malat.
swords?
Yeah, apparently like she paid mercenaries to honor the Kuat Malat on top of dying for the Kuat Malat, which I don't like. Those that's a great mercenary guild. Like
Yeah,
whatever
right.
she
Hired them for
like,
everything, apparently.
hire them for everything. They will do whatever you say as long as the price is right. Which I mean, maybe
I,
she would if she was paying them in dilithium.
I'm about to say maybe they got a bonus if they made it back alive.
Right.
So, I mean, so in a lot of so in some cultures, mercenaries why they will go as far as they will is because if they die, their family gets it. So if she just hired incredibly desperate people and paid them in dilithium, which makes her not only stupid but also evil.
So, yeah. So, anyways, that part was dumb. I really enjoyed all the other plot lines for this episode. I really loved of course, the Adira and Gray arc was really good and sweet, and then Tilly's arc where they're lining up like she's gonna probably. I think I read on Reddit someone described her as she's going to become a true D&D character in multi-class. She's gonna take another class and find another arc or whatever.
Hey, she knocked a sword away. she actually did something in combat.
Right. So good. So she's gonna find her a new path, which is gonna be interesting. The new lounge set, complete by the way, with a Ferengi bartender and a Lorien patron.
So
if you didn't see that.
I didn't see that. However, that has been one of the very few things I've gone on Star Trek subreddit where everyone loved.
Everyone loved it. It's great.
Everyone loved
fantastic.
It. And I'm like, Reddit is the most nitpick, and the Star Trek subreddit is one of the most nitpickiest things. Like it literally took me 30 seconds to find a 5,000 word essay on everything they liked and didn't like about the newest episode that they had to have watched maybe 6 hours ago.
I saw one where someone had clearly been editing it as he was watching it. As they were watching it, they were going in and editing their comments and adding more to it.
Yeah, and I'm just... Reddit is a special place.
But anyways, the vibe there was strong, and I'm here for it.
The vibe was very strong. And I love Saru's whole demeanor now. Because he's still very awkward. He's still obviously very uncomfortable. But simultaneously he's like, what makes me uncomfortable is you weirdos. I know what I'm about. I know who I am. I know all that. You people make me uncomfortable. And I'm going to help you. I'm going to do everything I can to help you.
But could you people make this a little less weird?
Just like Tilly. Just bring it down maybe 70% for me. I'd really appreciate that. So and I love Saru and Burnham's because they've completely shifted to where Saru's just yeah, this sucks. Here, let me help you with this.
Yep.
I'm really just being your first officer because I still want to be in the mix, but I still have a planet that I need to help run. And
God, that's so funny. Cool. Well, is there anything else about the episode or about the season that you want to talk about? Any likes or dislikes you want to call out?
I've pretty much I think hit all the things that I really liked and really didn't like. And my like list is significantly higher than my dislike. Season 4 has made me feel things. Which
like the bit with the mind meld in this episode where he was looking at his nephew and was he knew he loved me. That feels
and just dealing with the just cataclysmic scale of his loss, which I hope they don't make Book the sad one where something terrible happens to him.
I think they got him. No, yeah, let's hope he doesn't become the Miles O'Brien of the series.
I don't need that. Like
No.
we need something like
Have an episode where he Groundhog Days his own death.
like if there's anybody that needs to be the Miles O'Brien of the series, it's Stamets.
Absolutely.
Stamets.
That role's already filled. Tig Notaro's got it.
Yeah, but
even if it doesn't happen, she's going to probably pull up a story about something that happened.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's
Even if they
O'Brien.
don't show it, like
Well,
yeah,
it's-
it's really weird. This one time I got stuck in a time loop and I just kept seeing my own death or something like that. This one time I had a clone that I had to murder. It was weird.
It's like,
No,
listen,
no,
every time
no.
she.
This
Oh, go
one time I had a clone that I had to murder, but it turned out I was the clone, and so I murdered the original, and now I wonder, like, am I real? Am I fake? And then I just drink, and it's fine.
The reason I say that, though, is like if you ever see the compilation clips of Notaro on YouTube, it's like, since you said that, I was like, God, every time she just comes back on to a scene, it's like there's something has happened. She's clearly had to deal with it, and it's probably been drinking off scene to handle it. And it's just like, I'm here. I'm behind this console.
Like,
I love her so much.
she is the only character in Starfleet in all of Star Trek that it would not bother me if she smoked.
right, right. Of all the characters, God.
She's the only one who, like, we're like the Ben Affleck meme of him just like like holding the cigarette, just trying to cope with the existence of life.
And her like interactions with Stamets are like, particularly the episode where there's
You
like,
were stabbed and
Yeah.
nearly died. I like that was so good. I loved
good.
that. Where she's like, she was so like, she's the anti-Hugh, where it was just like he's gonna like comfort you and like just tell it all, and she's be like, you're being a lunatic, you're an idiot, you almost died. I think you technically did die, and you're like working like it's all fine. You're not fine. You need therapy.
Or conversely, she'll be like, "Here, take this hydro spanner up there, chop chop, before we all burn up and die," or something like that.
My favorite line is, I forgot who the security officer was from Pike's ship that joined him in season 2.
Oh yeah,
But when she comes down, she's like, "They said you needed help with Giorgio," and she's like, "You believe that? Really, Giorgio? Really? You believe that?" It's just like repeat it over and over. Really? Like,
No, it wasn't that she needed help with Giorgio. It's that
oh,
Giorgio said she needed
sorry,
help.
right, you're right.
And I really appreciate that character aspect of Giorgio, of just endlessly screwing with every single character she came across. That was just the best.
it is true. That's the one thing I miss about season 4 is I don't have any Giorgio.
Giorgio just endlessly screwing with everyone around her.
And not even like in a malevolent way, like just because.
Just because, like, I used to be an empress, I had incredible power, and now all I can do is really mess with you a little bit.
Yeah. Now all I can do is just make your life just a little bit more inconvenient.
And you know what? I'm like, what bothers me the most is I think I can live with it.
It kind of plays out like Ron Swanson in that Lowe's, where it's like, "Can I help you, sir?" It's like, I know more about everything than you do."
Yeah. It was the living version of that meme.
Oh god, so good. All right. Well, I think that about kills the subject.
Yeah.
We're good.
We're going to talk about Discovery when the season finale drops again. We may talk about it
We
again.
might talk about it if there's like a significant mid-season break.
Yeah.
We might circle back.
or if like something like super crazy happens.
Yeah. but we're going to play around with format. We're going to do some different things with different things. We don't want to become a Star Trek podcast where we just sort of like chat about an episode for an hour. We want to do more interesting things than that. So so just keep an eye on the feed, and we'll be up with some new stuff.
It may not be happening like this month, but definitely next year we are going to be doing some very different things than what we have been.
So for anybody watching or anybody listening, if you want to keep up with any of the Star Trek reviews I do weekly, you can go to nerdunion.us, or you can check the video version on our YouTube page. You can also go to patreon.com/nerdunion if you want to support us and see more of our content. We also have several Twitter accounts, at NerdUnion and at Redshirt Rejects. I'm on at JK Nelson, as where I'm most active, if you're curious. And then, we've got a TikTok now. We do the TikToks for you young folks out there.
Hello, fellow kids.
Hello, fellow kids. We do the TikToks now. We have some people who are younger at heart than us that do that. So we are not doing it. So
maybe we could do a Harlem Shake TikTok. That'll be really relevant.
Yeah, that'll be super.
Stop.
And then, of course, we have plenty of other shows on twitch.tv/nerdunion.
Too mean, Kenny?
Nah, it's good.
I thought the dial clip was really funny. I thought that was a good clip.
That was very good.
All right. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
I don't have any music, so I'm just playing this out.